ground to a halt. Hundreds of millions of people go on strike in India. Unions are demanding better pay and conditions, but the Indian economy is already weak. What will this show of force achieve? And how will the already struggling government react? This is Inside Story. Hello there, good to have you with us. I'm Shuli Ghosh. 11 major trade unions in India have gone head-to-head with the government, calling an all-out strike which has paralysed large parts of the country. The 24-hour action has brought transport to a halt and closed banks, businesses and factories. It's the latest test for a government badly shaken by a series of scandals and protests. From the capital, New Delhi, Prerna Suri reports.
These are government workers in India who say the country's inflation is too high and want a pay increase. As the rest of the world struggles financially, India's economy has been doing relatively well. But these protesters want the government to do more.
We receive only half our salaries, so we want our salaries to be paid in full every month. We also want all our other benefits and a pension.
People from all political sides gathered for this one-day strike on Tuesday. Over the last few months, life's been tough for them as they struggle with a higher cost of living, while their wages stay the same. This is just a small slice of the kind of rallies that are taking place across India. Over 800,000 state employees from 11 different trade unions across the political spectrum have joined hands today, and they're all speaking in one voice. Life in Kerala state came to a complete standstill, with businesses and banks shutting down. In India's financial capital, Mumbai, banks were also closed and commuters struggled to find public transportation. In the state of West Bengal, over 1,600 people were arrested for blocking rail and road traffic as police fought with striking workers. What's more worrying for the government is the political fallout from the strike. Important state elections are taking place in India. And over the past year, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's government has been hit by several allegations of corruption. This latest show of anger by the people against the issue of price rise isn't going to make it any easier. Prerna Suri for Inside Story, New Delhi.
Well, let's talk about the impact of all this. Today's guests are standing by. In New Delhi, Shailendra Kumar Pande, the General Secretary of the Delhi Union of Journalists. Also in New Delhi, Mahar Devan, Deputy General Secretary for the All India Trade Union Congress. And in Paris, Lawrence Saez, Professor of South Asian Politics at the School of Oriental and African Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme. Thanks for joining us. Mahar, let's talk to you with your union hat on. How would you assess the success of this 24-hour action?
Today we had a massive strike by all the workers in India. This is sponsored by the entire trade union movements in this country, irrespective of political affiliations. There were people, ruling party, opposition party, no party, everybody was a part of this massive strike today. This was the organized, unorganized, informal sector. All sectors are participating in this. 10-point charter of demands. And these 10-point charter of demands involve very many core issues and basic issues, including the payment of minimum wages, which has been decided, some formula was decided in 1957. That has not been implemented even today under the Minimum Wages Act. We want social security coverage for all the people, including the unorganized informal workers. We do not want our public sector to be privatized. There is a program of disinvestment of public sector in the government. We want the social security coverage universally for all employees, all the workers. And we want the labor laws to be implemented. Unfortunately, implementation of labor laws is totally very unsatisfactory in our country. We want the amendment to the various acts like bonus, like gratuity, like pension. All these things need to be amended to have a better coverage of all the people.
So basic labour rights and a minimum wage and a social security fund, all very important demands. But how does disrupting businesses and the flow of the economy in the country, how does disrupting that help with your demands?
The economy is on the up. People are getting, there are billionaires in India, their number is increasing. At the same time, people who below the poverty line, their number is also increasing. It's a dichotomy. The growth has gone into only some sectors. It has not trickled down. The unorganized sectors, they don't get the benefit of the economy's growth. There is a large number of poverty. Recently, there is a study of 43% of the children are undernourished in our country. This is admitted by Prime Minister himself as a shame to this country. So that is the situation. So we do not want this situation to continue. We want at least India being the founder member of the International Labour Organization. They have not ratified the core conventions, 87 and 93, 98. These are the core conventions for the organization of unions and the right to bargaining. Even these core conventions has not been ratified by the government, because of which the union registration, which is allowed in 1926 by a law, Trade Union Act, even that could not be implemented in many sectors now.
Okay, Mahar. Let's bring in S.K. Pande, who's also in New Delhi and has obviously been seeing the effects of today's strike. Is this action supported by the public? I mean, what do people think about all this?
You see, as this strike, to be very frank, Mahar Devan could not put it so aptly. This has been an unprecedented strike, in that for the first time there was a unison of so many factors and forces. It was not just necessity constrains bedfellows, it was something more than that, since the workers, even journalists, let me put it bluntly, are bound in many cases by bonds of contract. There are cases where a few hunger deaths have taken place from among the press workers also. In this situation, there was bound to be an explosion. I think in totality, there should have been negotiations with the government and employees much earlier. For instance, this has been going on for very long.
But there have been negotiations, haven't there, between the government and the unions, and those negotiations didn't get anywhere, which is why we're seeing the strike.
No, the problem has been something. There has to be, there has to be a desire to talk, not just a decision to talk. This somehow, sometimes with some of the unions, but recently, within the Labour Ministry also, the desire to talk, to decide is not there. Motions of talk do take place.
But that's interesting. I mean, why do you think there's no appetite for dialogue, given that there has been previous strikes in India which have disrupted the country and they don't seem to have achieved very much? Why is there no desire for negotiation?
You see, the labour implementation machinery over the years has crumbled down. To be very frank, the weightage which was given to the Honourable Labour Ministry, now a Labour Minister will be holding 3-4 portfolios. For instance, in Delhi, he could be holding, a minister could be a Labour Minister, he could be an Industry Minister, and he could also be a Justice Minister, all the three combined. Now, this can lead to a situation where it's not only ambition overleaping itself, but you see, all these three ministries should actually have been different ministries.
Okay.
But you're right, in the capital of India, Right in the capital of India, this is happening. The Labour Minister is the Justice Minister, he's the Industry Minister. So, you see, he has to listen to all the three sides rather than try and balance the picture. It's a really unfortunate situation, actually. I hope what happened today would not have happened.
Yeah,
Industrial
clearly,
peace is always welcome.
Clearly, the government is under a lot of pressure. Lawrence, these strikes aren't going to help. The government already reeling from a series of scandals. It's got a lot of economic problems, and now these strikes on top of everything else.
Yes, I mean, there's a situation here that I think we need to get a hold of. First of all, the people who are striking for very different motives. And I think that this is something that these two speakers have not really addressed properly. You have really, on one hand, you have this center-right party, the BJP, that is trying to undermine the capacity of this government this coalition government to rule. And so that on the one hand, they have specific aims that are not necessarily have to do anything with the type of things that these individuals have just mentioned. On the other hand, you have union leaders who are facing really a declining union membership. And on the third hand, you have the left front parties that are trying to also pressure the government. The government, I mean, it's not perfect by any means. I think that there are issues of corruption that have emerged and the press has highlighted. There are issues of forthcoming elections and so on. But the bottom line is that this specific government has tried its best to bring what it terms inclusive growth. It hasn't happened. It's unlikely that it's going to happen, specifically when you have to deal with the type of demands that union leaders are making that are exorbitant. The Indian government doesn't have the capacity to provide all the things that they want in terms of minimum wage, and they want social security and pensions and all the things. It's great. I mean, I would support that. The thing is that the government cannot afford to do that, and so it has to find ways to actually do that. And one of the ways that has found is to try to privatize state-owned enterprises. Once it does that, then it's able to be fiscally responsible, which I think what the Indian government should be doing.
OK, well, let's take this moment to talk about the economy, because, of course, the strikes come at a bad time for India's economy. It's growing at its slowest rate in 3 years. Now, it's estimated that over 200 million people are taking part in this strike that we're talking about across India. We know already the 11 main recognised trade unions have backed the strike, but another 5,000 unaffiliated unions are also taking part. Talking about India's economy, India's growth rate was 7% in the fiscal year ending in March. Well, that's down on earlier predictions of 9%. And although inflation did drop recently from 9.1% to 7.5%, it does remain stubbornly high. The government has a budget deficit of $45 billion, which it's trying to reduce by selling assets. Lawrence, one of the main grievances is this sell-off of stakes in state-run companies, in public sector companies. I mean, these are very profitable companies, aren't they?
Yeah, well, they are, and I think but you have to decide whether you want to be fiscally responsible, balance the budget, or you want to maintain the type of subsidies that the voter in India wants, namely free electricity, the type of demands that we heard from the previous speakers. And there's not a perfect world where that can happen. You have to decide what you want to do. And I think that if I were advising the current government, I would advise them to do exactly what they're trying to do, to try to sell off. But the sell-off of state-owned enterprises has been going on for decades now. It's an ongoing, very slow process. There's a lot of protests. India is a democratic country, and I support people's rights to strike and to protest against these things. But people's expectations are completely unrealistic with what the government can actually provide. And so that is at the core of this problem. And so my biggest fear is really that despite India's economic growth, that India's government is not going to be able to cope with the type of demands that it's facing from all quarters. And so there'll be policy paralysis to some extent over the next few years until a new election is called.
Mahar, how do you respond to that? The government simply can't afford to meet your demands.
This is not correct. Non-payment of minimum wages to the workers, there can be no excuse for that. The government is supporting the corporates. Government is wanting foreign direct investment with condition of union-free environment. That is the attitude. We don't agree with this. Government can afford to give minimum wages. Government can afford to give social security for all. Government gives a lot of corporate. In the last budget, a few hundred crores of budget relaxation was given to the corporates. But the unorganized sector workers, we want a national security fund.
But
Only
Devan, you have
3%
a
of the
situation.
GDP.
You have a situation where growth is slowing down, where inflation is extremely high, the budget deficit is getting out of control. What alternatives does the government have other than, for example, selling off stakes in its public companies? What alternatives does it have?
This is not a right thing. There are profit-making public sector which are doing very well, but the government is trying to privatize them, disinvest and take some money. 40,000 crores of rupees they want in this last year's budget to sell the shares of the public sector and weaken them. There is no point in some of these measures taken by the government. Their attitude is not conducive to the growth of public sector. We are opposed to that. Indian economy was really protected by the public sector and public sector banks. Private sector banks did not help. When the entire private sector banks in America and other places collapsed, Indian banks did not collapse because they were public sector. Our public sector organization enterprises have done a very good job in the growth of the economy. But this is not acknowledged and understood by the government. They go for privatization. Our demand is no privatization of at least profit-making industries.
Lawrence, I can see Lawrence in Paris shaking his head at that. What, do you want to respond to that, Lawrence?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to respond because it really goes to the core of the way that you look at the world. On the one hand, the private sector, half the state-owned enterprises that the central government of India, and more so at the state level, are failing. They are sick. They're banked up essentially, and nobody would want to buy something like that. And so the only thing that is left is really the profitable state-owned enterprises. As far as the issue of the banking sector, I mean, the banking sector is heavily dominated by state-owned banks, and so that's fine. And they have been invulnerable to global collapses, which is fine, but the thriving sectors of the Indian economy are not the state sector, and it shouldn't be. The thriving sector of the Indian economy is in the IT, in software, and in banking, but in private sector banking. ICICI is one of the world-leading banks, not because it's a state-owned bank, it's because it is a profit-making and competitive bank internationally. And so you have to decide whether you want to continue specific policies that in the past have failed in India, have impoverish the country, or they want to move in a new direction. And I think that the government is doing so in a very cautious, incremental way, which is the way that perhaps India should be moving.
SK, how do you think the government's economic policy has been rated in India? I mean, it's being accused of not doing enough to promote growth, but India has also always been referred to as one of the global powerhouses when it comes to the economy. So how is the government's handling of the economy rated?
You see, what is happening now is something which goes beyond our superpower status, which the present government, some sections of the government at least, think they are attaining. It's a rather ironic situation that 230 million Indians go hungry daily. This is the report of the Times of India. The hunger index is clearly there. Even perennial posts of work of a perennial nature are lying vacant. And like you and I, many of us are in 24/7 channels and 24/7 journalism. Bonds of contracts. It's an unprecedented situation for India that was known 20 years ago. Bonds of contract which bound them. In the case of Maruti itself, certain facts came to light which were very devastating on how they were made to sign under coercion various bonds. In some cases, even in some cases in the newspaper industry, believe it or not, in Delhi I can vouch for it. I am sorry to say there have been hunger deaths in a major national newspaper.
Well, that's a terrible situation, SK. Can I ask you, with all the things all the pressure that's been heaped on the government? I mean, I know it's facing a budget vote in Parliament next month. It's suffered the telecom scandals.
You see, you're right.
I mean,
it is
but do you think the government
situation.
can survive all this? Is it going to carry on limping on towards the next set of elections in 2014?
It will have to look for a situation where they should go to the negotiating table. If they do not go to the negotiating table, and if the policies do not undergo at least a mid-course change, then things, for instance, workers now, that feeling which was there in the 60s is coming back. That, in the days of Florence Nightingale and others, at one stage, I think it was she who said, it is better to make one can make the iron hot by striking. It is better to make the iron hot by striking rather than just by saying we will do this, we will do that. Similarly, on the government side, they should think in terms of negotiating, genuinely looking for ways, at least giving some measure to 30 million Indians going hungry daily.
Okay.
Anemic children.
Let me bring in Lawrence here, because I just want to quickly bring in the prospect of what this means for the government and whether there's any appetite for early elections in India.
Well, there's appetite from the BJP, which is in complete oppositely ideologically to the trade unions that are the leftist trade unions, even though the largest trade union in India is actually from the right. So there's appetite from the BJP. There's really the leftist parties may or may not want early elections. The Congress party doesn't have the capacity right now to have an early election for a number of reasons, not the least that there's lack of clarity as to who is likely to replace Manmohan Singh in our next general election. There are candidates who Chidambaram and Pranab Mukherjee who have emerged as potential kind of technocrats, but also there's always the problem in Indian politics of the Gandhi family, and so we have Rahul Gandhi being floating around as a potential prime minister, but he's not really prepared at this stage, and so he probably will not be it in the next 2 years. And so, given that Manmohan Singh is quite old and ill, I mean, there's a real prospect that he may die in office. I mean, sadly, but there's a reality, and so we have to decide whether that government has to decide whether it wants to continue on, which is probably what it's going to do until the next election, and then try to bring a new leader, which most likely would be Rahul Gandhi as leading the Congress party. But under those conditions, the BJP may be able to win beforehand if it calls an early election.
Okay, interesting stuff. Let me address the last question to Mahar. What's the next step for unions after today's strikes?
We are planning tomorrow to have a further discussion amongst us, because we have given enough notice to the government. This strike notice was given on the 2nd of December. Government did not respond. On the 14th and 15th of this month, we had an Indian Labour Conference, which is the apex body, where Prime Minister was there, where the Labour Minister was there. They did not respond. All of us, irrespective of our affiliation, we all said in one voice, there is a strike on 28, have a discussion. They did not do anything. In fact, Prime Minister went on record saying that the labour legislations are hampering the development, legislations. And I had to respond saying, non-implementation of labour legislation is hampering the development. It is not that, because if this situation continues, this will lead to violent clashes. There have been several industries in several parts of the country where there is a counter reaction from the workers. In some of those places, the chief executives have been murdered in some places. We don't want this to happen. We don't approve of this. We want this peaceful negotiation, discussion. Unfortunately, government has not been responding except giving some statement in the last minute when we go on a strike.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time. An interesting discussion. Thanks to all our guests in New Delhi, S.K. Pande, in Paris, Lawrence Saez, and also in New Delhi, Mahar Devan. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you have any comments or any opinions, do send us your feedback to insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Sheila Ghosh. I'll see you next time.